Blood pooled in the dust where her legs used to be. The Apache warrior woman named Saka lay abandoned in a ravine left behind by her own people as cannon fire echoed in the distance. 3 days she waited for death beneath the Arizona sun until a scarred cowboy found her eyes burning with defiance instead of surrender. What he did next broke every rule of the frontier, but it would save them both. Stay with me until the end and comment your city so I can see how far this story travels. The Arizona Territory had a way of keeping secrets. In 1881, the land stretched endless and unforgiving, painted in shades of rust and bone-white rock where the wind carried whispers of violence and the dust remembered blood. It was a place where mercy was rare as rain and trust could get you killed faster than a rattlesnake's bite. Saka knew this truth better than most. She woke to agony. Not the clean pain of a knife wound or the sharp burn of a bullet. This was something far worse. This was the grinding, impossible sensation of limbs that no longer existed, screaming at her from the void. Her mind struggled to surface through layers of fever and shock, and when she finally forced her eyes open, the world swam in waves of heat and crimson light. The ravine walls rose around her like the ribs of some great beast. Shadows stretched long across the sand, and she realized with dull horror that she'd been here for days. Maybe 3, maybe more. Time had lost all meaning when the cavalry's cannon had torn through the ridge where her people had made their stand. She remembered the explosion, the way the ground had seemed to rise up and swallow her whole, the deafening roar that had turned the world white, then red, then black. And she remembered crawling, dragging herself with bloodied hands through the dirt, while the screams of horses and men filled the air around her. Her tribe, what remained of them, had carried her as far as they could. She remembered strong hands, familiar voices, speaking words of comfort that felt like lies. They'd wrapped her stumps in whatever cloth they could spare, their faces tight with grief, and something worse, resignation. "We cannot stay." Her cousin's voice had broken. "They're still hunting us, Saka. We have to move fast." She'd understood. In that moment of terrible clarity, she'd understood completely. A warrior who couldn't walk, couldn't ride, couldn't run, she was already dead. To carry her further would doom them all, so they'd left her in the shade of the ravine with a water skin that had long since run dry and a rifle with 3 bullets. 1 for enemies, 1 for mercy, 1 spare just in case. The rifle lay somewhere beyond her reach now. She'd tried to crawl to it yesterday, or was it the day before, but her arms had finally given out. Now she simply lay there, half buried in sand that had drunk deep of her blood and waited for the end. The sun was a hammer. Each breath felt like inhaling broken glass. Her lips had cracked and bled, and she'd long since stopped trying to wet them with her swollen tongue. Flies buzzed around the rags that bound her stumps, and she lacked even the strength to wave them away. But her eyes still burned. Even as her body failed, even as fever cooked her brain and thirst turned her throat to leather, Saka's eyes held on to something the rest of her had lost. Defiance, pride, the absolute refusal to beg even from a god she wasn't sure was listening. She'd been a warrior, the youngest woman in 3 generations to earn the right to ride with the fighters, to draw blood in defense of her people. She'd counted coup on enemy soldiers, had felt the satisfying crack of her war club against a cavalryman's skull, had tasted the copper-sweet tang of victory in her mouth. Now she was this, a broken thing, in the dust, abandoned and alone. The thought should have brought tears, but she had no water left for crying. Instead, she closed her eyes and let the darkness pull her down again. Wade Holt had long since stopped believing in Providence. The war had beaten that out of him years ago, first during the blood-soaked fields of Virginia, and later in the quieter, crueler battles of trying to build a life from ashes. He'd learned that God, if he existed at all, was either blind or sadistic. and Wade had no use for either kind of deity. So he didn't pray anymore, he just worked. His ranch, if you could call it that, sat in a fold of land where Copper Ridge met the desert floor. It wasn't much a cabin of rough-hewn pine, a barn that leaned slightly west, and a few head of cattle stubborn enough to survive on scrub grass and determination. The land was hard, the water scarce, and the nearest town a full day's ride. It suited him perfectly. Wade preferred the company of silence. The wind didn't ask questions. The rocks didn't look at the burn scars that crawled up the left side of his neck like twisted rope. The sky didn't remind him of the wife and daughter he'd buried 3 winters back, when the cabin fire had taken everything he'd fought so hard to build. He'd pulled himself from those flames. He'd lived. Sometimes he wasn't sure that was a blessing. On this particular morning, Wade was tracking strays. 2 of his cattle had wandered off during the night, spooked by something, maybe a cougar, maybe just shadows. He'd saddled his roan gelding before dawn and headed into the broken country to the east, following hoofprints in the dust. The ridge country was treacherous, all sharp drops and hidden arroyos, places where a man could vanish and not be found until the buzzards led someone to what was left. Wade knew every foot of it, though. Had to. This land would kill you if you didn't know its moods, its hidden faces. He was following a game trail along the rim of a deep ravine when he found the first sign: dried blood on the rocks, already baked black by the sun. Wade reined in his horse and sat still, listening. The desert had a particular quality of silence. It wasn't empty, nothing truly was. But it was a silence made of small sounds. The scrape of lizard claws on stone, the whisper of wind through creosote bush, the distant cry of a hawk riding thermals overhead. But now, beneath it all, there was something else, a sound so faint he almost missed it, a rasp like leather dragging across sand, like breath struggling through a ruined throat. Human. Wade's hand moved to the rifle in his saddle scabbard. Every instinct he'd honed during the war and after screamed at him to be careful. This was Apache country, or had been before the army had pushed most of the tribes further south. Ambushes weren't uncommon. A wounded warrior could be bait for a trap. But that sound, that desperate failing rasp of someone clinging to life by their fingernails, he'd heard it before, in field hospitals and burning towns, in the small cabin where his wife had called his name one last time before the smoke took her. "God damn it," Wade muttered. He dismounted, ground-tying his horse, and moved carefully to the edge of the ravine. The blood trail led down, spattering the rocks, in a pattern that spoke of catastrophic injury. Whoever had bled this much shouldn't still be breathing. But they were. Wade eased himself over the lip of the ravine boots, finding purchase on the steep slope. He half-climbed, half-slid down 15 feet of loose stone and hard-packed earth until he reached the shadowed floor below. And there, half buried in wind-blown sand, he found her. For a moment, Wade's mind refused to process what he was seeing. The figure was so still, so covered in dried blood and dust, that it looked more like some grim sculpture than a living person. But then he saw the shallow rise and fall of breath, saw the flies scatter as he approached, saw the eyes, those eyes. They opened as he knelt beside her, dark and fierce, and absolutely refusing to surrender. Not pleading, not grateful, just burning with a defiance so pure it hit him like a fist to the chest. She was Apache. Young, maybe 20 winters. Her face was sunburned and cracked, her lips split and bleeding, but it was below her waist that Wade's gaze traveled and stuck. The blood-soaked rags, the impossible flatness where legs should be, the flies clustered thick on wounds that should have killed her days ago. "Jesus Christ," he breathed. Her mouth moved. No sound came out at first, just the ghost of words, on a tongue too swollen to shape them. Wade leaned closer and finally heard it, a whisper, so faint it was almost nothing. "Silent man." Wade sat back on his heels, his mind racing. Every practical thought told him to leave. She was Apache. The tribes and the settlers had been at war for decades. Just last month, a ranch 20 miles south had been burned to the ground. The week before that, a stagecoach had been ambushed. She was the enemy. She was dying. She was someone's daughter, and she was dying alone in the dust. Wade looked at her eyes again, still burning, still refusing to beg, and something in his chest cracked open. Some calcified piece of his heart that he'd thought long dead. He'd left men to die before, in the war when orders demanded it, on the frontier when survival required it. He'd made peace with those choices, or at least learned to live with them. But this felt different. Maybe it was because she didn't beg. Maybe it was because she looked at him like she'd rather die than accept his pity. Maybe it was because in those fierce, fading eyes, he saw something he recognized, a soul that had survived too much to quit now, or maybe he was just tired of death. "I'm going to move you," Wade said quietly. "It's going to hurt like hell." Her eyes narrowed slightly, the only response she could manage, but he saw something flicker there. Not gratitude, not hope, just acknowledgement. He worked quickly, efficiently, the way he'd learned in field hospitals during the war. First, he checked the makeshift tourniquets that bound her stumps. They were crude but effective, probably the only reason she'd survived this long. He tightened them slightly, then carefully slid his arms beneath her. She was lighter than he expected, too light. The fever and blood loss had burned through her like wildfire, leaving almost nothing behind. When he lifted her, she made no sound, not a whimper, not a gasp, but her body went rigid with pain, and he felt her fingernails dig into his shoulder like talons. "That's right," he said softly. "Hold on. Just hold on." The climb back up the ravine was brutal. Wade's boots slipped on loose stone, and twice he nearly fell, which would have sent them both tumbling to the bottom. But he kept his balance, kept his grip, kept moving. His horse shied when it smelled blood, but Wade had trained him well. The gelding held steady as Wade carefully draped the woman across the saddle, then mounted behind her, holding her against his chest. She passed out somewhere during the ride back. Wade felt her body go limp, felt the terrible heat of fever radiating through her skin. He pushed the horse harder than he should have, racing the sun toward home. The cabin appeared on the horizon just as dusk began to paint the sky purple and gold. Wade's arms ached from holding her, and his shirt was soaked through with her blood and his sweat. He carried her inside and laid her on his own bed, the only bed. The mattress was old and lumpy, stuffed with straw and cotton, but it was clean. He'd learned to keep things clean after the war when he'd seen too many men die from infected wounds. For 3 days, Wade fought for her life. He cleaned her wounds with whiskey and hot water, changing the blood-soaked bandages every few hours. He dripped water onto her cracked lips, then broth when she could swallow. He stayed awake through the nights, when her fever peaked, bathing her burning skin with cool cloths and watching for the signs of infection that would mean the end. She thrashed, sometimes crying out in Apache words he couldn't understand, but whose meaning was clear enough. Names, warnings, grief. He talked to her during those times, his voice low and steady, not sure if she could hear, but hoping some part of her knew she wasn't alone. "You're stronger than this," he'd say. "Whatever took your legs didn't take your fight. I can see it. You're still in there." On the third night, her fever finally broke. Wade had dozed off in the chair beside the bed, exhausted beyond measure. He woke to find her eyes open and clear, watching him with that same fierce intensity. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then she licked her cracked lips and managed a single word, "Why?" Her voice was rough, scraped, raw, but understandable. Wade considered the question. He could tell her about duty, about human decency, about the war, and what it had taught him about the value of mercy. He could tell her about his wife and daughter, about the guilt that rode his shoulders like a physical weight. But in the end, he simply said, "I didn't want to." Her brow furrowed slightly. "Didn't want to? What? Leave you?" She studied his face for a long time, as if looking for the lie. When she didn't find one, something shifted in her expression, not gratitude, not yet, but perhaps the first crack in a wall built from pride and pain. "You could have," she said finally. "I know. I'm Apache." I know that too. My people killed your people, and my people killed yours. Wade leaned forward, elbows on his knees. Seems like we're both on the same side now, the living. That's enough for me. She closed her eyes, and for a moment he thought she'd slipped away again, but then she spoke so quietly he almost missed it. Saka, my name is Saka. Wade, he replied. Wade Holt. Silent man, she murmured, and there was something that might have been the ghost of a smile on her cracked lips. You talk more than you look like you should. Despite everything, the blood, the pain, the impossible weight of what lay ahead, Wade felt his own mouth twitch. I'll try to be quieter. Don't! Her eyes opened again, fixing on his. The silence is where the ghosts live. I've had enough of them. Over the following days, Wade watched her fight her way back from the edge. It wasn't a gentle recovery. There was nothing peaceful about the way Saka clawed herself back to consciousness, back to strength. She refused pity like it was poison. The first time Wade tried to help her drink, she knocked the cup from his hand and dragged herself, arms trembling, stumps bleeding through fresh bandages, across the floor to the water bucket. She collapsed before she reached it, but the message was clear. She would do it herself or die trying. Wade learned to adjust. He'd bring water and leave it within reach. He'd cook food and set it on the bedside table. He'd change her bandages only when she slept, because awake she'd fight him pride, making her cruel. I don't need your hands on me, she'd hiss through gritted teeth. Then you'll bleed to death, he'd reply calmly. Your choice. She'd glare at him with those burning eyes, but eventually she'd let him work. Not because she trusted him, not because she'd accepted her situation, but because she was smart enough to know that survival sometimes meant swallowing your pride. 2 weeks after he'd found her, Wade began building. He worked in the barn using spare lumber from an old wagon and leather straps from worn-out tack. His hands remembered skills he'd learned during the war, improvising, adapting, making do with what was available. What he built wasn't pretty, just a flat board on wheels with handles she could use to pull herself along, but it was strong, and it was hers. He brought it to the cabin at sunset, rolling it through the door with the kind of casual nonchalance that said this was no big thing, nothing to make a fuss about. Saka stared at it from the bed, her expression unreadable. What is that? She asked finally. Legs, Wade said simply. Different kind, but they'll get you around. She was quiet for so long he thought she might refuse it, might see it as another kind of pity, another reminder of what she'd lost. But then she spoke, and her voice was softer than he'd ever heard it. Legs of pine. If you want them. She looked at him, then really looked, and Wade saw something shift behind those fierce eyes. Not surrender, not acceptance exactly, but perhaps the beginning of understanding that this, whatever this was between them, wasn't about charity or guilt. It was about two people who'd been broken in different ways, learning to breathe in the same room. Help me, she said. It wasn't easy. The first time Wade lifted her onto the board, her whole body went rigid with pain and humiliation. She gripped the handles so hard her knuckles went white, and he could see her jaw clenched against the tears that pride wouldn't let fall. But she didn't quit. Day after day, she pulled herself around the cabin. Her palms bled, her arms shook with exhaustion. More than once she collapsed, breathing hard, sweat pouring down her face, and every time she got back up. Wade watched her transform, watched muscle build in her arms and shoulders, watched her learn the balance, the rhythm, the 1,000 small adjustments that turned the board from a tool into an extension of herself. He watched, and he understood Saka wasn't recovering. She was rebuilding herself piece by painful piece into something new. One evening, as the last light faded and Wade was cooking beans over the stove, he heard her voice behind him. You stayed. He turned. She sat on her board in the doorway, silhouetted against the purple dusk. Her hair had grown long enough to fall around her shoulders, and she wore one of his old shirts, 2 big sleeves rolled up but clean. I did, he said. Why? The question again, but different this time. Not angry, just seeking. Wade set down the spoon and thought about it, really thought about it. I was tired, he said finally. Tired of the war, tired of the killing, tired of watching people die because it was easier than saving them. He met her eyes across the small room. You looked at me like you were worth saving, like you knew it, and I wanted to believe that was still true, that there was still something worth saving in this whole damn territory. Saka was quiet for a moment. Then, I hated you at first. I know. I thought you saved me to break me, to turn me into something grateful and small. I know that too. But you didn't. No. She pulled herself forward on the board, moving with a grace she'd earned through pain and practice. When she reached him, she looked up, and for the first time since he'd found her, there was no wall in her eyes. Silent man, she said softly. You're the loudest, quiet person I've ever met. Wade felt something in his chest, something he'd thought had died with his family in the fire, a warmth, a possibility. Stay for dinner, he said, though she already was. I'm not going anywhere, she replied. And in that moment, in that small cabin at the edge of the world, two broken people found the first threads of something neither had expected, a reason to keep breathing. The days that followed settled into a rhythm neither of them had planned, but both came to depend on. Wade would wake before dawn as he always had and start the fire. The smell of coffee would pull Saka from sleep, and she'd find him already outside tending to the animals or mending fence. By the time he returned, she'd have pulled herself to the table, her board positioned just so, waiting. They didn't talk much during breakfast. The silence between them had changed, though transformed from the brittle quiet of strangers into something softer, something that felt almost like companionship. More coffee, Wade would ask, pot in hand. Yes, she'd reply, pushing her cup forward. Not please, not thank you, just yes. And somehow that honesty felt more genuine than all the polite words in the world. It was during one of these quiet mornings 3 weeks after he'd found her that Saka finally asked about the scars on his neck. Wade was scraping the last of his eggs from the pan when her voice cut through the morning stillness. Fire. His hands stilled. He didn't look at her. What makes you say that? The way the skin pulls, the color. I've seen burns before. She paused. And the way you check the stove 3 times before you sleep. You're afraid of it. Wade set down the pan slowly. No one had been direct enough to ask before. The few people who visited the supply wagon driver, the occasional drifter, they'd seen the scars and looked away uncomfortable with the question they raised. But Saka didn't look away from anything. 3 years ago, he said finally, still facing the stove. Winter, I was out checking the stock, and when I came back... He stopped, his throat working. The cabin was already burning. My wife and daughter were inside. I got the door open, got inside, but the smoke... You couldn't find them. Saka finished quietly. I found my daughter, got her out, but she was already gone. Went back for my wife, and that's when the roof came down. His hand moved unconsciously to his neck. Woke up outside in the snow. Don't know how I got there, but they were both... He couldn't finish. The cabin was silent except for the crackle of the fire in the stove. My mother died in fire too, Saka said. Different kind. The cavalry burned our village when I was 12. She went back for my brother's medicine bundle, the one our grandmother made. Said his spirit would be lost without it. Her voice remained steady, factual. She never came out. Wade finally turned to look at her. She sat straight on her board, hands folded in her lap, her face as composed as if she were discussing the weather. I'm sorry, he said. Don't be. She made her choice. I made mine when I picked up a rifle instead of running. Saka's eyes met his. We both chose to fight. We both lost. Now we're here. Here, Wade repeated. Alive, she said, for whatever that's worth. Wade crossed to the table and sat down across from her. It's worth something, has to be. Does it? Her head tilted slightly. Some days I think they left me in that ravine because I was already dead. just too stubborn to know it. You're not dead. No, she agreed. But I'm not what I was either. I was a warrior, Wade. I rode with the fighters. I counted coup. I made my enemies fear my name. Her hands clenched on the table. Now I can't even stand up to piss without falling over. The raw honesty of it hit him square in the chest. No self-pity, no tears, just the brutal truth of her new reality. No, Wade said carefully. You're not what you were, neither am I. The man I was died in that fire, and I'm still figuring out what's left. He leaned forward. But what I see sitting across from me isn't someone who gave up. You fight every damn day just to move across a room. That takes more courage than anything I did in the war. Courage, Saka said bitterly. That's just another word for having no other choice. Maybe. Or maybe courage is choosing to keep going when giving up would be easier. She looked at him for a long moment, and he saw something flicker in her eyes, not quite hope, but perhaps the shadow of it. The possibility that maybe, just maybe, there was a reason to keep pushing forward. You're a strange man, Wade Holt, she said finally. I've been called worse. I'm sure you have. And there barely visible was the hint of a smile. The spring rains came late that year, but when they arrived hard. For 3 days straight, water pounded the cabin roof like artillery fire, and the world beyond the windows turned to gray curtains of falling water. Wade couldn't work outside, which meant they were trapped together in the small cabin. It could have been unbearable, two people who'd spent so much of their lives in solitude, now forced into constant proximity. Instead, it became something else entirely. Saka began to talk. Not about the big things, not at first. She started with small observations, the way Wade always poured coffee from the left side of the pot, how he cut his bread in precise squares, the fact that he counted fence posts in his sleep. You do that, you know, she said on the second day of rain. Count things. Fence posts, coffee beans, steps from the door to the table. Everything. Wade looked up from the harness he was mending. Old habit from the war. You count things, you stay focused. Stay focused, you stay alive. And now, he considered. Now I guess I just haven't figured out how to stop. I count too, Saka admitted. Pulls on this board to cross the room. Breaths before the pain eases. Days since... She trailed off. Since they left you. Since I became this. She gestured at herself at the board, at the empty space where her legs should be. Wade set down the harness. How many days? 43. 43 days of being something broken. You're not broken. Then what am I? The question came out sharp, challenging. Healing, Wade said simply. There's a difference. That night, while the rain hammered overhead, Saka told him about her life before. She spoke of riding across the desert, of the way the wind felt against her face when her horse reached full gallop. She described hunting antelope with her uncle, the patience required to track the precision needed for the kill. I was good at it, she said, staring at the fire. Being a warrior, moving fast, hitting hard, disappearing before they knew what happened. My body was my weapon, every part of it. My legs for running, for riding, for balance when I swung my war club. Her voice grew distant. Now half my weapon is gone. Wade listened without interrupting, letting her words fill the space between them. What will you do? He asked finally. When you're stronger, when you're ready. Saka's laugh was harsh. Do, what can I do? My tribe is scattered. Even if I could find them, what use would I be? I can't ride, can't run, can't fight. She turned to look at him. I'm a burden no one can afford to carry. You're here now. That counts for something. Here, she repeated, and the words sounded hollow. In a white man's cabin living on charity, learning to crawl on a board like a child. The bitterness in her voice was so thick, Wade could almost taste it. It's not charity, he said quietly. Then what is it? Wade struggled for the right words. How could he explain that saving her had been less about her and more about him? That in pulling her from that ravine he'd been trying to prove to himself that he was still capable of something other than surviving. That her presence here, difficult and uncomfortable, as it sometimes was, made him feel less like a ghost haunting his own life. "It's two people trying to figure out how to live again," he said finally. "That's all." Saka studied him in the firelight, and he had the sense of being weighed, measured, judged against some standard only she knew. "You lost everything in that fire," she said. "Why build again? Why not just let it all go?" "I tried that. For a year after I tried. Drank myself stupid, let the ranch fall apart, waited for something to give me a reason to quit completely." Wade's hands worked at the leather of the harness, his fingers moving from memory. "But I kept waking up, kept breathing, and eventually I realized that if I was going to keep breathing anyway, I might as well do something with it. And now, what are you doing with it now?" Wade met her eyes. "Right now, I'm sitting in a cabin during a storm, talking to someone who understands what it's like to survive something that should have killed you. That feels like enough." The third day of rain, Saka asked Wade to teach her to mend things. "My hands need purpose," she said. "Show me how to fix what's broken." So Wade taught her to work leather, to splice rope, to hammer bent nails straight. Her hands, already strong from pulling herself across floors and working the board, learned quickly. She had a natural precision, a patience that surprised him. "You're good at this," he said, watching her stitch a torn bridle with small, even stitches. "I'm good at using my hands, always have been. Weaving, beadwork, skinning game." She didn't look up from her work. "My grandmother said hands remember what the mind forgets. Maybe mine remember being useful." They worked in comfortable silence for a while, the rain providing a steady rhythm overhead. Then Saka said something that made Wade's hands still. "I dream about running." He waited. "Every night. I dream I'm whole again, running across the desert with the wind in my face. And every morning I wake up and remember." Her stitching didn't pause. "The dreams are getting worse, more real. Last night I could feel the ground under my feet, feel my muscles working. When I woke up and looked down..." She finally stopped, her hands trembling slightly on the leather. "It's cruel. The mind is cruel." Wade set down his own work. "I dream about the fire. Different each time, but always the same ending. I can't reach them. I can never reach them." "Does it get better?" "No," he said honestly. "But you get stronger. The dreams stay the same, but you learn to carry them." "I don't want to carry them. I want to outrun them." "Can't outrun what's inside you, Saka." She looked at him then, and he saw tears threatening at the corners of her eyes, the first he'd witnessed. But she blinked them back, refusing to let them fall. "Then what do I do?" "You do what you're doing now. You wake up, you move forward, you find small purposes, mending leather, drinking coffee, sitting through storms, and maybe one day you wake up and realize the dreams don't have the same power anymore." "Is that what happened to you?" Wade considered lying, offering false hope, but Saka deserved better than that. "No," he admitted. "The dreams still have power, but now I have something that fights back against them. This place, this work, the choice to keep building instead of burning it all down." "And me?" Saka asked quietly. "Am I part of that? Part of your reason to keep building?" The question hung in the air between them, heavy with implications. Neither of them was quite ready to name. "Yes," Wade said simply. "You are." When the rains finally stopped, the world emerged, scrubbed clean and new. The desert bloomed overnight, wildflowers pushing through the wet earth in explosions of yellow and purple. The air smelled of creosote and possibility. Wade opened the cabin door to let in the fresh air, and Saka pulled herself out onto the porch, breathing deep. "I forgot it could smell like this," she said. "Clean, like the world started over." Wade leaned against the porch rail, looking out at his land transformed by rain and bloom. "Happens every spring. Desert's good at new beginnings." "I was always moving in spring. My people would break winter camp, start the migration to summer grounds. We'd cover 50 miles in a few days, following the game, following the water." Her voice held a longing that was almost painful to hear. "I can't even cross this porch without wheels under me." No, Wade agreed, but you can cross it. That's something. Saka turned her board to face him. Is it enough? Will it ever be enough? Before Wade could answer, the sound of hoofbeats reached them, distant, but approaching fast. Both of them tensed. Visitors were rare out here, and rarely good news. Wade's hand moved to the rifle by the door. Get inside. No! Saka's voice was firm. I'm not hiding anymore. If trouble's coming, I'll face it. The rider appeared over the ridge, a single man on a paint horse moving at an easy lope. As he got closer, Wade relaxed slightly. He recognized the horse, if not the rider. It's just Tom Bridger, runs the supply wagon from Silver Creek. But Tom's face, when he got close enough to see clearly, was troubled. He reined in at the porch, his eyes widening when he saw Saka. Wade, he said, tipping his hat nervously. Didn't expect. That is, I heard rumors, but... Spit it out, Tom. The older man's eyes darted between Wade and Saka. There's talk in town about you harboring a hostile. Some folks are saying you've got an Apache up here, one that was in the fighting at Copper Ridge. Wade's jaw tightened. And what are these folks planning to do about it? That's why I rode out. Sheriff's getting pressure to investigate, and there's a bounty hunter came through last week asking questions about Apache survivors from that fight. Man named Keller, dangerous sort. Saka's hands gripped the edges of her board until her knuckles went white, but her face remained impassive. When? Wade asked. Could be any day now. Sheriff's trying to hold them off, says he needs proof before he comes all the way out here, but Keller... Tom shook his head. Keller don't need proof, he just needs rumors. Wade nodded slowly. Thanks for the warning, Tom. The supply man looked uncomfortable. Wade, I don't care what you got going on out here. You've always been square with me. But these folks, they're looking for blood. What happened at Copper Ridge, the soldiers that died. People want someone to pay. She's already paid, Wade said quietly. More than anyone should have to. Tom looked at Saka, really looked at her, and saw the board, the missing legs, the scars visible, even from a distance. Something in his weathered face softened. I can see that, but seeing and believing are two different things for most folks. He turned his horse. You watch yourself, Wade, both of you. As Tom rode away, Saka spoke without looking at Wade. You could still leave me somewhere, a town, another tribe, somewhere that wouldn't bring this trouble to your door. No, you don't even know what I did, what I might have done in those fights. Wade moved to stand in front of her, making her look up at him. I know what you're doing now, that's what matters. Is it? Her voice cracked slightly. Is it really that simple for you? Nothing's simple, but some things are clear. You're here, I'm here. Whatever's coming, we face it together. For the first time since Tom's warning, something other than fear showed in Saka's eyes. She reached out slowly and touched Wade's hand where it rested on the porch rail. Silent man, she said softly, you speak the loudest truths. That night they prepared. Wade cleaned his rifles and counted ammunition, while Saka sharpened knives with a whetstone, her hands moving with practiced ease. They worked in focused silence, the kind that comes before a storm. If they come, Saka said, eventually testing the edge of a blade with her thumb. You can't fight them all, not for me. I'm not planning to fight if I don't have to, but I'm not handing you over either, even if it costs you everything. Wade looked at her across the small cabin, this fierce woman who'd fought her way back from death, who refused to surrender even when her own people had left her behind. I've lost everything before, he said. I know what that looks like. This, he gestured between them. This is different. This is choosing to keep something instead of watching it burn. Saka's eyes glistened in the lamplight. Why choose this? Choose me. Wade set down the rifle he'd been cleaning and moved to kneel beside her board. He looked up at her, at the face that had become as familiar to him as his own reflection, and told her the truth. Because when I pulled you out of that ravine, you looked at me like I was worth the effort it took to hate me, like I mattered enough to be your enemy. His voice roughened. No one had looked at me like I mattered in 3 years. Even if you hated me, at least you saw me. I don't hate you anymore, Saka whispered. I know. I don't know what I feel. It's all confused. You're white. You're a man. You're everything I was taught to fight against. But you're also... She struggled for words. You're the only person who didn't leave, who didn't look at me and see just broken pieces. I see you, Wade said. All of you, the warrior and the survivor, the pride and the pain. I see it all, Saka. She touched his face, then her calloused palm against his scarred cheek. I see you too, silent man. I see you trying to build something from ashes. I see you choosing life when death would be easier. They stayed like that for a long moment, kneeling together in the lamplight, two broken people holding on to each other like lifelines. Whatever comes, Wade said finally, we face it standing or sitting in your case. Saka's laugh was unexpected, breaking the tension. Your jokes are terrible. I know. Don't stop making them. I won't. She pulled him closer then until their foreheads touched. Promise me something. Anything. If they come and it goes bad, if there's no way out, you don't die for me. You hear me? You've already given me life once. I won't take yours too. Wade pulled back to look her in the eyes. That's not a promise I can make. Then we're both fools. Maybe, he agreed. But we're fools together. Outside, the desert night settled in with its 1,000 small sounds. Somewhere in the darkness, trouble was coming. But inside the cabin, Wade and Saka sat together, sharpening blades and checking rifles, preparing to defend something neither of them had expected to find a reason to fight for tomorrow. The knock came 5 days later, just after dawn. Wade was already awake, standing at the window with his coffee, watching the sun paint the desert gold. He'd been sleeping light since Tom's warning, and he saw the dust rising from the road a full 10 minutes before the horses arrived. 3 riders. Too many to be friendly, too few to be the law. Saka, he said quietly. She was already moving, pulling herself across the floor on her board with quick, efficient motions. They'd practiced this. She positioned herself near the door, a rifle across her lap, hidden from view, but ready. Wade opened the door before they could knock again. The man in front was tall and lean, with a face like weathered leather and eyes that missed nothing. He wore 2 pistols on his hips and a badge that looked like it had been polished that morning, just for show. Wade Holt, the man asked, though his tone said he already knew. That's right. Name's Keller. I'm tracking Apache from the Copper Ridge fight. Got information suggests one might have ended up here. Wade leaned against the doorframe, deliberately casual. Information from who? That's my business. You gonna invite me in to look around, or we gonna have a problem? Depends. You got any legal right to be here? Because last I checked, a bounty hunter's got no authority to search a man's property. Keller's smile didn't reach his eyes. Now we can do this easy or hard, Holt. I know you got someone in there. Had 3 different people tell me they heard about a crippled Apache woman on your land. Now you can hand her over peaceful, collect a portion of the bounty, and we all go our separate ways. And if I tell you there's no one here but me, then I'd say you're a liar and I'd have to prove it. Keller's hand drifted toward his pistol. And I'm real good at proving things. The 2 men behind Keller shifted in their saddles, hands moving to their own weapons. Wade recognized the type drifters and troublemakers who hired on with men like Keller for quick money and the chance to hurt someone legal. How much? Wade asked. Keller's eyebrows rose. How much what? How much is the bounty on her head? $200. Dead or alive, though dead's easier to transport. Keller's grin widened. You want in on it? That what you're saying? Wade appeared to consider it, and in that moment of hesitation he caught movement from inside the cabin, Saka shifting position. He needed to end this before it escalated. I'm saying I want to know what a man's life is worth these days, Wade said carefully. $200. That's what the government pays to kill someone who's already lost everything. Apache ain't people, Holt. They're savages, and this one in particular she's wanted for killing soldiers at Copper Ridge. Now you gonna step aside? No. The word hung in the morning air, simple and absolute. Keller's face hardened. You're making a mistake. Probably, but it's my mistake to make. We're coming in, Holt. You can't stop all three of us. Wade's hand moved to the rifle leaning against the doorframe, casual but ready. Maybe not, but I'll damn sure stop you, and I think you're too smart to die for $200. For a long moment, nobody moved. The desert morning was silent except for the sound of the horses shifting and the distant cry of a hawk. Then Keller laughed, but there was no humor in it. Smart man, but this ain't over. I'll be back with the sheriff and then you won't have a choice. Then I'll deal with the sheriff when he comes. But right now, you're on my land without permission and I'm asking you to leave. Keller's jaw worked as he stared at Wade, measuring him. Finally, he spat in the dust and turned his horse. You're protecting a killer, Holt. That makes you as guilty as she is. Then I guess I'm guilty. The three men rode off, but Wade knew it was far from over. He watched until they disappeared over the ridge, then closed the door and turned to find Saka still gripping the rifle, her knuckles white. You should have given me to them, she said, her voice tight. No. Wade, they'll come back. With more men with the law. You heard him. I'm wanted for killing soldiers. They'll hang you for harboring me. Wade crossed to her and gently took the rifle from her shaking hands. Let them come. You're a fool. You've told me that before. Saka's composure cracked. This isn't a joke. They want me dead, and they'll kill you to get to me. Everything you've built here, everything you've survived, you'll lose it all. For what? For someone you found bleeding in the dirt. Wade knelt in front of her, taking her face in his hands. For someone who reminded me why surviving matters. For someone who looks at me and sees a man instead of a ghost. For someone He stopped, the words catching in his throat. Say it, Saka whispered. For someone I care about. More than this land. More than this life I've been barely living. Tears spilled down her cheeks. Then the wall of pride finally crumbling. I care about you too. That's why I can't let you die for me. Then don't let me die. Help me fight. She laughed through her tears, sharp and broken. Fight, look at me, Wade. I can't even stand. You don't need legs to shoot straight, and you've got more fight in you than any 10 men I've known. He wiped her tears with his thumbs. We're stronger together, you know we are. Together, she repeated, as if testing the word. When did that happen? When did we become we? Wade thought about it all, the small moments that had led here. The coffee shared in silence. The work done side by side. The stories traded like precious things. The way she'd learned to trust him with her pain, and he'd learned to trust her with his ghosts. I don't know, he admitted. Somewhere between the ravine and right now, does it matter? No, Saka said softly. I suppose it doesn't. They spent the rest of that day fortifying the cabin. Wade built a hidden space beneath the floorboards, not large but enough for Saka to hide if necessary. He positioned rifles at strategic points, checked ammunition, and mapped out escape routes. Saka watched him work with growing unease. You're preparing for war, she said as evening fell. I'm preparing to survive. There's a difference. Is there? She pulled herself closer to where he was reinforcing a window shutter. Wade, I've seen war. I've lived it. This is how it starts. Fortifications, weapons, the certainty that violence is coming, and it always comes. Wade hammered in another nail, then sat back on his heels. What do you want me to do? Just wait for them to take you. I want you to live, even if that means don't. His voice was sharp. Don't ask me to choose between living and letting you die. That's not a choice I can make. Saka's hand found his shoulder. Then we're both choosing to fight impossible odds. Wouldn't be the first time for either of us. She smiled at that sad and knowing. No, I suppose it wouldn't. That night, as stars filled the desert sky, they sat together on the porch. The air had cooled and Wade had draped a blanket over Saka's shoulders. She leaned against the cabin wall, watching the darkness with eyes that seemed to see beyond it. "Tell me something true," she said suddenly. Wade looked at her confused. "What do you mean, something you've never told anyone, something real?" He was quiet for a long moment thinking. Then, "Sometimes I'm glad the fire happened." Saka's head turned sharply toward him. "What? Not glad they died, never that, but glad that it forced me to feel something again. The pain, the loss, it was terrible, but at least it was real. At least I felt something other than the numbness that came after the war." He stared out at the desert. "Does that make me a monster?" "No," Saka said quietly. "It makes you human. Pain is proof we're alive. Sometimes it's the only proof we have." "Your turn. Tell me something true." She considered her fingers working at the edge of the blanket. "I'm afraid," she said finally, "not of dying. I've made peace with that. But of this, of what we have, whatever it is, I'm afraid it's just a dream, that I'll wake up back in that ravine still waiting to die, and all of this will have been fever and delusion." Wade reached over and took her hand, lacing his scarred fingers with hers. "Feel that?" "Yes." "That's real. I'm real. This is real." "How can you be sure?" "Because dreams don't hurt this much. They don't scare you this bad. And I am scared, Saka, terrified of losing this, losing you. But that fear, that's how I know it matters." She turned her hand in his, gripping tight. "When they come, if they come." "When they come," she insisted, "promise me you won't do anything stupid. No grand gestures, no sacrifices. I promise to do whatever it takes to keep us both breathing. That's the only promise I can make." Saka pulled their joined hands to her lips and pressed a kiss to his knuckles, rough and scarred from work, warm and alive. "Then I'll hold you to it, silent man." They sat like that until the moon rose, two people holding on to each other against the vast indifference of the desert night. The next day brought an unexpected visitor. Wade was working on the corral fence when he saw the rider approaching alone, this time moving slowly. As the figure got closer, he recognized the tin star catching sunlight. Sheriff John Morrison was older than Wade by a decade, with silver threading through his dark hair and a face that had seen too much to be easily shocked. He'd been sheriff of Silver Creek for 15 years, and Wade had always found him to be fair, if by the book. "Sheriff," Wade said, straightening. Morrison nodded, dismounting. "Wade, we need to talk. I figured you'd be coming. Keller came to me, said you're harboring a fugitive Apache, said he offered you a share of the bounty and you threatened him instead." "That how he told it?" Morrison's mouth twitched. "Among other details, but I know Keller and I know you, so I'm here to get the truth before this gets uglier than it needs to be." Wade set down his hammer. "Coffee." "Wouldn't say no." They walked to the cabin and Wade could feel Saka's presence inside, alert, ready. He opened the door and stepped in, Morrison following. The sheriff stopped when he saw her. Saka sat on her board near the table, straight-backed and defiant, a rifle within easy reach. Her dark eyes met Morrison's without flinching, daring him to say something, to judge, to condemn. Morrison's gaze traveled from her face to the board, to the obvious absence below her waist, and something in his expression shifted. "Ma'am," he said, removing his hat. Saka's eyes narrowed, surprised by the courtesy. Wade poured coffee for all three of them, then sat at the table. "This is Saka. I found her dying in a ravine 6 weeks ago. Brought her here, been helping her heal. Keller says she's wanted for killing soldiers at Copper Ridge." "Keller's a bounty hunter who sees money in misery," Wade said. "I don't know what happened at Copper Ridge, don't much care. What I know is I found a woman left for dead, and I couldn't leave her there." Morrison sipped his coffee, his eyes never leaving Saka. "Were you at Copper Ridge?" he asked her directly. For a long moment, Saka didn't answer. Then, "Yes." "Did you kill soldiers?" "I fought. That's what warriors do. Your soldiers killed my people. We killed yours. That's war. Morrison set down his cup. The official report says 32 soldiers died in that ambush. Families want justice. The army wants blood. And Keller wants his bounty. What do you want, Sheriff? Wade asked. Morrison rubbed his face tiredly. I want this territory to stop bleeding. I want people to stop dying over land and pride and old hatreds. But that's not the world we live in, is it? No, Wade agreed. It's not. The sheriff looked between them at Wade's protective stance, at Saka's fierce dignity, at the obvious connection that had formed in this small cabin. You know I could arrest you both, Morrison said. Wade for harboring a fugitive, her for being Apache and alive when 32 soldiers are dead. I know. You know it'll mean a rope, for both of you most likely. Maybe not legal, but legal doesn't always matter when folks are angry enough. I know that too. Morrison was quiet for a long moment. Then he stood, placed his hat back on his head, and looked at Saka. How old are you, girl? 20 winters. 20 years old. And you've already lost enough for 3 lifetimes. He turned to Wade. And you pulled yourself out of hell once. You really want to go back in? Not particularly, Wade said, but some things are worth it. Morrison walked to the door, then paused with his hand on the frame. I didn't see anyone here today, just a man living alone on his ranch. You understand me? Wade stood slowly. Sheriff. But Keller won't let this go, and there are others who'll come, the army maybe, federal marshals, people with more authority than a county sheriff who doesn't want more blood on his hands. Morrison's voice was heavy. I can't protect you forever, Wade, and I won't be able to stop what's coming. How long do we have? A week, maybe 2 if you're lucky. Use it wisely. Morrison left without another word, climbing onto his horse and riding back toward town. Wade watched him go, feeling the weight of borrowed time settling on his shoulders. When he came back inside, Saka was staring at the door. He could have arrested us, she said. Yes. Why didn't he? Wade sat down across from her. Maybe because he's tired of following orders that lead to more death. Maybe because he sees what I see when I look at you. And what's that? Someone who deserves a chance to live, really live, not just survive. Saka's hands clenched on the table. A week, maybe 2. Then what? Then we figure it out. Together. There is no figuring this out, Wade. They want me dead or in chains, and they'll go through you to get to me. So we run. The words hung between them, simple and impossible. Run where? Saka gestured at her board, at her missing legs. I can't ride. I can barely move across a room. How far do you think we'd get? Wade leaned forward, an idea forming. We don't run far, we run smart. There are places in the desert, old Apache refuges, places your people used when they were hunted. You must know some of them. I do, but Wade, those places require climbing, moving through rough terrain. I can't. I'll carry you. I've done it before. Saka's eyes widened. Through the desert, for days, maybe weeks, you'd die. Maybe, or maybe we'd live, both of us. He reached across and took her hands. I'm not giving up on this, on us. There has to be a way. She looked at their joined hands, at the scars and calluses that marked them both as survivors. You really are a fool, silent man. Your fool, though. Yes, she said softly. My fool. That night, they began to plan. Saka drew maps in the dirt floor, marking water sources and hidden canyons she remembered from her childhood. Wade gathered supplies, food that would keep, blankets, weapons, everything they might need for a desperate flight into the wilderness. But even as they planned, both of them felt the shadow of impossibility hanging over every decision. Running meant leaving everything Wade had built. It meant gambling their lives on the slim chance they could disappear into a desert that was increasingly controlled by the army. It meant choosing each other over safety, over sense, over survival itself. There's another option, Saka said as midnight approached. Wade looked up from the pack he was assembling. What? You let me go, alone. I'll take one of your horses, ride as far as I can, lead them away from here. You stay, tell them I stole the horse and ran. They'll believe you. No. Wade, no. He crossed to her, kneeling so they were eye to eye. I didn't pull you out of that ravine just to watch you ride off to die, and I didn't spend 6 weeks helping you heal just to lose you now. But you'd lose everything else. I lost everything once before. You know what I learned? Things can be rebuilt. Land cabins, fences, all of it. But some things, once they're gone, they're gone forever. His hand cupped her face. I won't lose you. Not if there's any other choice. Saka closed her eyes, leaning into his touch. When did I become so important to you? I don't know. Somewhere between hating me and tolerating me, you became the reason I remember why life matters. She opened her eyes, and in them, Wade saw fear and hope and something deeper, something that terrified him even more than the bounty hunters and soldiers. I love you, she said the words barely a whisper. I didn't mean to, didn't want to, but I do. Wade's breath caught. No one had said those words to him since the fire, since before the fire. He'd thought he'd never hear them again, never feel the terrible, beautiful weight of them. I love you too, he said, and meant it with everything he had left. They came together then, not gently, but with the desperate intensity of people who knew time was running out. Saka pulled him close, her hands fierce on his shoulders, and their kiss was heat and hunger, and the acknowledgement that this, whatever this was, might be all they ever got. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Saka rested her forehead against his. 1 week, she said. Maybe 2. We should make it count. Every moment, Wade promised. Every single one. And in that small cabin surrounded by preparations for flight and war, 2 broken people held each other and pretended just for a moment that love might be enough to save them. The days that followed existed in a strange suspension between hope and dread. Wade and Saka moved through their preparations with methodical care, but beneath the practical work something else was growing, something neither of them had expected to find. In the shadow of approaching danger, they made love again on the 3rd night, this time slowly learning each other's bodies with a tenderness that felt like defiance against everything trying to tear them apart. Saka guided Wade's hands across her scars, the rough terrain of her stumps, refusing to let shame dictate what they could share. Don't avoid them, she whispered when his fingers hesitated at the edge of bandaged flesh. They're part of me now, all of me. Wade traced the scarred tissue with reverent fingers, then pressed his lips there, feeling her shudder beneath him. All of you, he echoed. That's what I want. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the narrow bed, her head on his chest, his hand stroking her hair. The intimacy felt both ancient and brand new, as if they'd known each other for lifetimes and were just now discovering what that meant. Tell me about your wife, Saka said into the darkness. Wade's hand stilled for a moment, then continued its gentle path through her hair. Her name was Margaret. Everyone called her Maggie. She was quiet like me. We could sit for hours without talking and never feel the need to fill the silence. Did you love her? Yes, different than this, but yes. He paused, searching for words. It was a peaceful kind of love, safe. We fit together easy, like 2 stones worn smooth by the same river. And your daughter, Emma. His voice caught on the name. She had her mother's eyes and my stubborn streak. 4 years old when it happened. She used to follow me everywhere, chattering about everything she saw. Birds, clouds, the way shadows moved across the floor. Saka pressed her palm flat against his chest, feeling his heartbeat. You don't have to tell me more. No, I want to. Wade pulled her closer. I need you to know that what I feel for you doesn't erase them. They're still part of me, still shape who I am, but what we have, it's not a replacement. It's something new, something I didn't think I'd ever find again. Something born from pain, Saka said quietly. Maybe that's the only way real things are born, through fire and blood and refusing to quit. She tilted her head up to look at him in the moonlight filtering through the window. I was taught that white men were the enemy, that they took everything and gave back only death. But you gave me back my life. How do I reconcile that? You don't, Wade said simply. You just accept that people are complicated, that good and bad don't follow the lines we draw on maps or the colors of our skin. Sometimes the enemy shows you mercy. Sometimes your own people leave you to die. The world's messier than we want it to be. Messier, Saka repeated, a hint of smile in her voice. That's one word for it. The next morning brought an unexpected sound wagon wheels on the road. Wade was instantly alert, rifle in hand, but when he looked out the window, he saw Tom Bridger's supply wagon moving faster than its usual pace. Tom pulled up to the cabin looking harried, his weathered face creased with worry. Wade, you got trouble coming. Big trouble. How big? Keller's convinced some folks in town that you're protecting a murderer. They've formed up a posse, maybe 15, 20 men. They're planning to ride out here tomorrow, maybe the day after. Tom glanced toward the cabin. Is she still here? Yes. Tom shook his head. You're a damn fool, Wade Holt. So I've been told. The older man climbed down from his wagon with a heavy sigh. Look, I brought some things. Extra ammunition, some dried food, medical supplies. Figure you might need them one way or another. Wade felt something tighten in his chest. Tom, you could get in trouble for this. Let me worry about that. I've known you since you came to this territory. You've always been a good man, even when the world gave you every reason not to be. If you say this Apache woman deserves protecting, then I believe you. He started unloading supplies. Besides, my Mary would have my hide if she knew I let you face this alone. She always said you had too much grief and not enough people watching your back. They carried the supplies inside, and Tom's eyes widened when he saw Saka sitting at the table cleaning a rifle with practiced efficiency. She looked up at him with that same fierce pride Wade had first seen in the ravine. Ma'am, Tom said, removing his hat. Saka studied him for a moment. You're helping him. Why? Because it's the right thing to do. And because I'm too old to start ignoring what's right just because it's inconvenient. Something shifted in Saka's expression, not quite trust, but acknowledgement. Thank you. Tom nodded, then turned back to Wade. You got a plan. Working on it. Work faster. That posse's blood is up. Keller's been filling their heads with stories about the ambush, about soldiers dying. They're not coming to arrest her, Wade. They're coming to hang her, and probably you too, for protecting her. After Tom left, Wade and Saka sat at the table, the weight of reality pressing down on them. Tomorrow, Saka said. Maybe the day after. Not much time to run. No, Wade agreed, but enough time to decide. Decide what we've already decided. We run, we hide, we hope they don't find us. Wade was quiet for a moment, then said, There's another option, one I've been thinking about. Saka looked at him warily. What option? We don't run, we don't hide. He met her eyes. We stand our ground. We make them see you, really see you, not an Apache warrior, not a killer, not a bounty. Just a person who's already lost everything and deserves a chance to live. You can't be serious. Why not? Morrison saw it. Even Tom sees it. Maybe if we show them what? Saka's voice rose. That I'm crippled, that I'm helpless, that I'm not a threat anymore. Is that supposed to make them merciful? No. Show them that you're human, that this hate, this cycle of killing it, has to stop somewhere. Why not here? Why not with us? Saka slammed her hand on the table. Because they don't want to see. They want blood for blood, death for death. They don't care that I can't walk. They don't care that my own people abandoned me. They just want someone to punish, and I'm convenient. Maybe, but maybe, there is no maybe, Wade. She pulled herself back from the table, her board scraping across the floor. You want to believe that reason and mercy can win. That's because you still have faith in people. I don't. I learned better. My people left me to die. Your people want to hang me. There's no mercy coming. There's just survival, and barely that. Wade crossed to her, kneeling in front of her board. You're right. I do still have faith. You know why? Because you're here. Because I found you dying and brought you home, and somehow we found something worth protecting. If that can happen, if we can happen, then maybe there's hope for something bigger. Hope, Saka said bitterly. Hope gets you killed. Maybe, but so does running, so does hiding. At least if we stand and face them, we do it with dignity. We do it as people who refuse to let hate win. Saka grabbed his face with both hands, her grip almost painful. You beautiful, stupid man, you really believe this, don't you? I have to, because the alternative is accepting that the world is just pain and violence, and I can't live that way anymore. I won't. Tears welled in her eyes. I'm so afraid. I know, so am I. If we do this, if we stay, we could both die. Yes. And you're willing to risk that? Wade covered her hands with his. I'm willing to risk everything for the chance that love and mercy mean something, that we mean something. Saka pulled him close, burying her face in his shoulder. He felt her tears soaking through his shirt, felt her body shaking with fear, and something else, maybe hope, fragile and terrifying. If we die, she whispered, at least we die as ourselves, not running, not hiding. Together, Wade said, together. They spent that night not preparing for flight, but for a different kind of battle. Wade cleared space in the cabin's main room, while Saka began working on something he couldn't quite see, her hands moving with focused intensity. What are you making? He asked. You'll see. In the morning, she showed him. It was a sash stitched from an old shirt, and a piece of leather with a single word carved and burned into the material, still. Still what? Wade asked. Still here, still breathing, still fighting even when they took my legs, still loving even when the world says I shouldn't. She held it up. Still human no matter what they want to believe. Wade felt his throat tighten. It's perfect. Help me put it on. He draped it across her chest, tying it at her side. She sat straighter, the word prominent, impossible to ignore. There, she said, let them see this. Let them see that they haven't broken me, that I'm still here. The day passed in strange calm. They cooked together, ate together, talked about small things and large ones. Wade told her about his childhood in Virginia, about the farm his father had worked. Saka told him about learning to ride, about her first hunt, about the grandmother who had taught her to weave stories into patterns. As sunset approached, Wade took her outside to the porch. The desert was painted in shades of orange and purple, the air cooling the world momentarily perfect. Whatever happens tomorrow, Wade said, I want you to know something. What? You saved me just as much as I saved you, maybe more. You reminded me that I'm still alive, still capable of feeling something other than grief and guilt. You gave me a reason to care about tomorrow. Saka leaned against him. Silent man, you talk too much when you're scared. I am scared. Good. That means this matters. They sat together as the stars emerged, as the desert cooled, as their last peaceful night settled around them like a blessing. Inside the cabin, rifles waited. Outside, somewhere in the darkness, men were gathering with ropes and guns and righteous anger. But here, on this porch, two people held each other and refused to let fear take everything. I love you, Saka said into the growing darkness. I love you too. No matter what happens tomorrow. No matter what. The next morning arrived too soon, announced by the thunder of hoofbeats. Wade was already awake, had been for hours standing at the window and watching the sun rise over the desert. They're coming, he said quietly. Saka pulled herself to her position near the door, the sash across her chest, a rifle across her lap. Her face was composed, but Wade could see the tension in her shoulders, the way her hands gripped the weapon. We could still run, she said, out the back into the desert. No, we decided. We stand. Wade, we stand, Saka, together, whatever comes. The riders appeared over the ridge more than Tom had warned about. Maybe 30 men, some carrying torches despite the morning sun, others with ropes coiled at their saddles. Keller rode at the front, and beside him Wade recognized several men from town. Merchants, ranchers, men he'd traded with, shared whiskey, with men he'd thought were decent. But decent men could do terrible things when fear and anger twisted them up inside. The posse surrounded the cabin, and Keller dismounted, his hand on his pistol. "Wade Holt," he called out, "you got one chance to do this peaceful. Send out the Apache woman and we'll let you live. Refuse and we burn you out. Your choice." Wade stepped out onto the porch, unarmed but unafraid. "She's done nothing to you. She killed soldiers, that's enough. She fought in a war, same as you, same as me, that make us all killers." A voice from the crowd, "It's different. She's Apache. She's a person," Wade said, his voice carrying across the morning air. "A person who's already lost everything, her legs, her people, her whole life. And you want to take the rest. You want to hang someone who can't even stand." Murmurs rippled through the posse. Wade pressed on. "I know some of you. John Peters, you brought your sick son to me last winter when you couldn't afford the doctor. I gave you medicine, asked for nothing back. Remember that? And Bill Harrison when your barn burned, who helped you rebuild." He looked at each man in turn. "I'm asking you now, what kind of men are you? The kind who hang a crippled woman because it's easier than admitting that maybe, just maybe, there's been enough blood." The cabin door opened behind him, and Saka emerged, pulling herself on her board. The morning sun caught her sash, the word still blazing like a declaration. The posse fell silent. She pulled herself to Wade's side and looked out at the assembled men with those fierce, unbreakable eyes. "You want to hang me," she called out, her voice strong and clear. "Then look at me, really look. See what your war has already taken. See what I've already lost. And then ask yourselves if one more death will bring back your soldiers, will ease your pain, will make any of this right." Keller's face twisted. "Don't listen to her. She's a savage, a killer." "I was a warrior," Saka interrupted. "I fought for my people, same as your soldiers fought for yours. I killed, yes, and I would have died for my cause. But my people left me broken in the desert to die alone. Your enemy did that, and this man," she gestured to Wade, "this white man you want to punish, he's the one who showed me mercy. He's the one who proved that maybe people can be more than their hatred." She pulled herself forward slightly, her board scraping across the wooden porch, and the sound was loud in the silence. "I am still here," she said, and the word on her sash seemed to burn in the morning light. "Still breathing, still human, and if you hang me, if you kill him for showing mercy, then you prove that hate wins, that the war never ends, that we're all just animals tearing at each other until nothing's left." A long, terrible silence followed. Then one man dismounted, John Peters, the one whose son Wade had helped. He walked to the porch, looked at Wade, at Saka, and then turned to face the posse. "I can't do this," he said. "I won't. This isn't justice. This is just more killing." Another man dismounted, then another. Keller's voice rose, desperate. "What are you doing? She's a murderer. The bounty. Keep your blood money," John Peters said. "I won't have this on my soul." More men were dismounting now, some walking away, some just standing there, unable to reconcile what they'd come to do with what they were seeing. But not all of them. A shot rang out. The bullet tore through the morning air, and for one frozen heartbeat the world held its breath. Wade felt the impact before he heard the sound, a punch to his shoulder that spun him sideways. He stumbled, catching himself on the porch railing as blood began to seep through his shirt. "Wade!" Saka's scream cut through the chaos. Keller stood with his pistol raised, smoke curling from the barrel, his face twisted with rage and desperation. "Nobody leaves. We came here to finish this, and by God we will." But the shot had broken something in the crowd. The men who'd been wavering now moved decisively, some rushing toward Keller, others toward Wade. John Peters reached Keller first, knocking the gun from his hand. "You son of a bitch," Peters growled. "That's enough. Wade slumped against the porch post. His hand pressed to his shoulder. The pain was sharp but manageable. He'd been hurt worse in the war. Through the haze of shock, he felt Saka's hands on him, heard her voice breaking as she tried to assess the wound. "Don't you dare die," she said, her fingers pressing against the bleeding. "Don't you dare leave me now." Not planning on it, Wade managed, though his voice was strained. Sheriff Morrison rode into the clearing, then his horse lathered from hard riding. He took in the scene, the divided posse, Keller being held by 3 men, Wade bleeding on the porch, Saka clutching him, and his face went hard. "What in hell happened here?" Morrison demanded. "Keller shot him," Peter said. "Wade was just talking, trying to reason with us, and Keller fired." Morrison dismounted and walked straight to Keller. "That true?" Keller's eyes were wild. "He was protecting a killer. I had every right." Morrison's fist connected with Keller's jaw, dropping him to his knees. "You had no right. You're not the law. You're just a man with a gun and a mean streak." He turned to the assembled men. "All of you get the hell off this property, now." The posse began to disperse, some shamefaced others muttering among themselves, but they left. Even the ones who'd been most eager for blood seemed shaken by what had nearly happened, Morrison climbed the porch steps and knelt beside Wade. "How bad?" "Went through," Wade said through gritted teeth. "Missed the bone." "Lucky man." "Don't feel particularly lucky right now." The sheriff's eyes moved to Saka, still pressing her hands against Wade's wound, her face fierce with concentration and fear. "You did this," he said to her. "You stood up there and made them see you as human. That took courage." "Courage didn't stop the bullet," Saka said bitterly. "No, but it stopped a lynching. It made good men remember they're good." Morrison stood. "I'll take Keller in. Attempted murder inciting violence. He'll see a cell for a good long while." "And her?" Wade asked, nodding toward Saka. Morrison was quiet for a moment. "Far as I'm concerned, I never saw any wanted Apache out here. Just a woman who's already paid a heavy price for a war none of us started, but all of us have to end somehow." He looked at them both. "You two keep your heads down. Stay out of town for a while. Let this settle. Can you do that?" "Yes," Wade said. "Good." Morrison tipped his hat to Saka. "Ma'am, you take care of this fool. He's going to need it." After Morrison left with Keller in chains and the last of the posse scattered to the wind, Saka helped Wade inside. Her hands shook as she cleaned the wound, as she stitched it closed with thread and whiskey, as she bandaged it tight. "You could have died," she said, and her voice broke on the words. "You stood there in front of all of them unarmed, and you could have died. But I didn't. That's not the point." She tied off the bandage harder than necessary, making him wince. "You promised me no grand gestures, no sacrifices, and then you stood there like you were daring them to shoot you. I wasn't trying to get shot. I was trying to reach them, to make them see. And you did, and you nearly died for it." Saka pulled back, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "Don't you understand? I can't lose you. Not now, not after everything." Wade reached for her with his good arm, pulling her close. "I'm right here, still breathing, still stubborn as ever." She laughed, but it came out more like a sob. "Still stupid, you mean?" "That too." They held each other in the small cabin, surrounded by the evidence of their stand. The rifles they hadn't needed to fire, the blood on the floor, the morning sun streaming through windows that had witnessed something impossible. Not a miracle exactly, but something close. A moment when mercy had won over hate, when people had chosen to see instead of judge. "What now?" Saka asked finally, her head against his chest, listening to his heartbeat. "Now we live," Wade said simply. "Really live. Not just survive, not just get by. We build something here, together. They might come back. Others like Keller, the army even. Maybe. But we faced the worst today and we're still here, both of us. That counts for something." Saka was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "I want to plant something. Here on this land, something that grows, something that proves we're not just surviving, we're living. What do you want to plant? I don't know. Something beautiful, something that shouldn't survive in the desert but does anyway. She smiled against his chest. Something stubborn like us. Over the following days, as Wade's shoulder healed, they began to truly settle into their life together. The cabin that had been Wade's solitary refuge became theirs. Saka's weaving hung on the walls, her tools beside his, her presence in every corner, making the space feel lived in for the first time in years. Wade built her a better board, this one with smoother wheels and padded handles. He constructed ramps throughout the cabin and porch, making it easier for her to move. And when she complained that she was tired of being low to the ground, he built her a chair high enough that she could sit at the table properly with cushions and supports that held her comfortably. "You're always building," she observed one evening, watching him work on a new shelf. "It's what I do, build things. Fix things, make things better." "You made me better," Saka said quietly. Wade set down his hammer and crossed to her. "No, you made yourself better. I just gave you the space to do it." She pulled him down for a kiss, slow and deep, and when they parted, her eyes were bright. "We're quite a pair, aren't we? The crippled warrior and the scarred builder." "The survivor and the survivor," Wade corrected. "The stubborn fool and the stubborn fool." "That works too." Tom Bridger visited regularly now, bringing supplies and news from town. The story of what had happened at the Holt Ranch had spread, transforming in the telling. Some versions painted Wade as a hero, others as a fool, but most agreed that something significant had shifted that day. "People are talking different now," Tom said one afternoon, unloading flour and coffee. "About the Apache, about the war, about everything. What you two did, standing up there, making them see, it's got folks thinking." "Thinking what?" Wade asked. "That maybe there's another way. That maybe all this killing and hating doesn't have to go on forever." Tom glanced at Saka, who was working on a beaded design at the table. "You've become something of a symbol, ma'am. The warrior who chose peace, the enemy who became human." Saka's hands stilled on her work. "I didn't choose peace. Peace was forced on me. I just chose to keep living despite it." "Well, whatever you want to call it, it's made a difference." After Tom left, Saka sat on the porch, staring out at the desert. Wade joined her, settling into the chair beside her. "Do you regret it?" he asked. "Standing up to them, letting them see you." "No," she said after a moment. "But I'm not sure I'm comfortable being a symbol. I'm just a person trying to figure out how to live with what I've lost." "That's exactly what makes you powerful. You're not pretending it's easy. You're not claiming that love and mercy solve everything. You're just showing that they're possible. Even after everything you've been through, you're still choosing to be here, to build something to love." Wade took her hand. "That's the most revolutionary thing you could do." Saka squeezed his fingers. "Revolutionary. That's a big word for just trying to survive." Sometimes they're the same thing. As spring deepened into summer, their life found a rhythm. Wade worked the land while Saka managed the household, her strong arms and clever hands proving capable of everything from cooking to mending to keeping the accounts. They were partners in every sense, each compensating for the other's limitations, each building on the other's strengths. Sheriff Morrison stopped by once more in early June with news. "The federal government's changing its policy," he said, accepting coffee from Saka. "They're talking about reservation lands, about trying something other than extermination. Won't be easy, won't be fair, but it's something." "Because of what happened here?" Wade asked. "Partly. Your story reached some ears in Washington. Someone wrote it up in a newspaper back east, and it got people asking questions about how we've been handling things out here." Morrison shook his head. "Amazing what one act of mercy can do. Ripples out further than you'd think." After Morrison left, Saka was quiet for a long time. "What is it?" Wade asked. "I was just thinking about my people, the ones who left me in that ravine. They did what they thought they had to do to survive. And I survived anyway, just in a way they never could have imagined. She looked at Wade. Do you think they know that I'm still alive? I don't know. Does it matter? It shouldn't. But part of me wants them to know that they didn't break me, that being left behind wasn't the end, that I found something here, found you, and built a life they told me was impossible. Wade moved to sit beside her. Maybe one day you'll get to tell them yourself. Maybe, or maybe this is enough. This life, this love, this stubborn refusal to quit. She leaned against him. Maybe being still here, still breathing, still loving, maybe that's the only revenge I need. The summer brought its own challenges. The heat was brutal, the water scarce, and twice they faced dust storms that threatened to tear the cabin apart. But they weathered each trial together, learning to read each other's moods, to anticipate each other's needs, to function as a single unit. On a particularly hot evening in July, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the desert, in shades of fire, Saka said something that made Wade's heart stumble. I want to marry you. He turned to look at her, surprised. What? By Apache custom, by white custom, by whatever custom you want. I want to be your wife. I want to make this, she gestured between them, official, real, something the world has to recognize. Wade felt a warmth spreading through his chest that had nothing to do with the desert heat. You're sure? I've never been more sure of anything. You're my husband in every way that matters. I just want the words to match the truth. Then yes, Wade said, and his voice was rough with emotion. Yes, I'll marry you. They married themselves that night under a sky so full of stars, it seemed the universe was bearing witness. There was no preacher, no guests, no official ceremony, just two people speaking vows to each other in the language of survival and stubborn hope. Saka took a small bone ring she'd been carving in secret, rough and imperfect but strong, and slipped it onto Wade's finger. This is my promise, she said, to stand with you in whatever way I can, to build with you, to fight beside you, to love you until my last breath. You saved me when I was nothing but blood and dust in a ravine. You stayed when anyone else would have left. You're my husband now, silent man, for whatever time we have. Wade produced his own ring, a simple band he'd fashioned from silver wire twisted and shaped by his own hands. This is my promise, he said, sliding it onto her finger, to see you always. Not the warrior you were, not the woman you think you should be, but exactly who you are. To build a life with you that honors both our pains and our hopes. You're my wife now, and I guess that makes me the luckiest damn fool in the territory. Saka laughed through tears, and they sealed their vows with a kiss that tasted of salt and promise and the desert wind. The months that followed were not easy. Nothing worth having ever is. There were days when Saka's phantom pains were so bad she could barely move, when the loss of her legs felt fresh and unbearable. There were nights when Wade woke screaming from dreams of fire, when the past threatened to swallow him whole. But they learned to carry each other through the darkness. When Saka couldn't bear the pain, Wade would sit with her, holding her hands, talking her through it with stories of the future they were building. When Wade's ghosts came calling, Saka would anchor him with her presence, reminding him that the past was done, but they were still here, still breathing, still fighting for every tomorrow. Tom Bridger brought news in October that made them both pause. The armies established a reservation about 60 miles south, he said. Some of the Apache tribes are being moved there. Peaceful settlement, they're calling it. Thought you'd want to know in case Saka's people are among them. After Tom left, Saka was quiet for the rest of the day. That evening she finally spoke. I want to go, just to see, just to know if they're alive, if they made it. Wade nodded. Then we'll go. It's 60 miles, I can't ride that far, and you can't carry me. We'll take the wagon, we'll go slow, we'll figure it out. He took her hand. If you need to see them, we'll find a way. They made the journey over 4 days, Wade driving the wagon while Saka sat beside him, her eyes constantly scanning the horizon. When they finally reached the reservation, Saka's breath caught. It was a collection of makeshift shelters and government tents, hundreds of Apache people living in conditions that made Wade's jaw tighten with anger. But Saka wasn't looking at the poverty, she was looking at the faces. "There," she breathed, pointing. "That's my cousin. He's alive." They approached slowly, Wade helping Saka down from the wagon onto her board. The people who saw them stared at Saka, at Wade, at the impossible sight of an Apache woman and a white man arriving together. Saka's cousin, a man named Daklugie, approached warily. When he recognized Saka, his eyes went wide. "You're alive," he said in Apache, which Wade didn't understand, but whose meaning was clear. Saka responded in the same language, and Wade watched as shock turned to something else on Daklugie's face. Shame, perhaps, or regret. They spoke for several minutes, Saka's voice never wavering, her spine straight despite sitting on her board. Finally, Daklugie knelt before her and said something that made Saka's eyes glisten with tears. When he left, she turned to Wade. "What did he say?" Wade asked. "He said they thought I was dead, that leaving me was the hardest thing they'd ever done, but they had no choice. The soldiers were coming and they couldn't carry me and survive." She wiped her eyes. "He said he dreams about me every night, about the ravine, about leaving me there. He asked for my forgiveness. And I told him I forgave him a long time ago, that I understand now what survival costs, that I'm alive and that's enough." She reached for Wade's hand. "I told him I found something in that ravine I never would have found if they'd carried me with them. I found you. I found a life I never imagined. And I told him that sometimes the worst thing that happens to us leads to the best thing we never knew we needed." They stayed at the reservation for 2 days. Saka reconnected with family, told her story, and introduced Wade to people who looked at him with suspicion that slowly transformed into cautious respect. They saw how he cared for her, how they moved together as a unit, how their love was real and hard-won and impossible to dismiss. On the journey home, Saka was quieter than usual. When Wade asked if she was all right, she smiled. "I am. I just needed to close that door, to see that they're alive, to let them see that I am too, to forgive and be forgiven." She squeezed his hand. "Now I can move forward without that weight. Now it's just us and whatever we want to build." "What do you want to build?" Wade asked. Saka looked out at the desert stretching endlessly around them, at the sky so vast it seemed to hold infinite possibility. "A home," she said. "A real home. Not just a place to survive, but a place to live, to love, to prove that mercy and hope and stubborn refusal to quit can make something beautiful out of all this pain." "Then that's what we'll build," Wade promised. And they did. Over the following year, their ranch transformed. Wade built additions to the cabin, creating spaces where Saka could work and create. She started weaving again, creating patterns that told stories of pain and loss. Yes, but also of survival and love and the strange grace of finding light in darkness. Word spread about them, and slowly, cautiously, others began to arrive. People who were tired of the fighting, tired of the hate, looking for an example of another way. Some stayed just long enough to rest and heal before moving on. Others settled nearby, building their own homesteads, creating a small community, bound by the belief that enemies could become neighbors, that wounds could heal, that love was stronger than history. The Apache woman and the white man who defied every rule became a symbol of something fragile but precious, the possibility of peace in a land soaked in blood. They never had children of their own. Saka's injuries had taken that possibility along with her legs, but they fostered orphans from both sides of the conflict. Apache children who'd lost their families, white children whose parents had died in the fighting. They raised them together, teaching them by example that family was made, not born, that love crossed all boundaries, that survival meant more than just breathing. On the 5th anniversary of the day, Wade pulled Saka from that ravine. They stood together on their porch, Wade's arm around Saka's shoulders, her hand resting on his chest, both of them looking out at the desert, that had witnessed their impossible love. "Do you ever regret it?" Saka asked. "Taking me in everything that came after." Wade pulled her closer. "Every day was hard. Every day was a fight. But regret you. Regret us." He shook his head. "Never. Not for one single moment. Even when I'm difficult, when the pain makes me cruel. Especially then, because that's when you need me most. That's when love matters." Saka tilted her head up to kiss him, soft and sweet and full of 5 years of shared struggle and joy. When they parted, she smiled. "Silent man, you still talk too much, and you still have too much pride. We're both still fools." "The best kind," Wade agreed. As the sun set over the desert, painting everything in gold and shadow, they remained on that porch, two people who'd been broken by violence and remade by mercy, who'd chosen each other when the world said they shouldn't, who'd built a life from nothing but stubborn hope and refusing to quit. Behind them, children's laughter echoed from the cabin, Apache and White playing together without understanding that they were supposed to be enemies. In the barn, horses waited to be fed. In the garden, Saka had insisted on planting impossible flowers bloomed in the desert soil, their roots deep, their colors bright. And in that moment, Wade understood what Saka had meant about being still. They were still here, still breathing, still loving, still building, still proving that mercy wasn't weakness, but the bravest choice anyone could make. The desert had tried to kill them both. War had taken everything they'd once been. Hate had demanded their deaths. But they'd survived it all, and in surviving, they'd created something more powerful than any weapon, more enduring than any hatred. They'd created a home where love was stronger than history, where hope refused to die, and where two broken people had become whole, not by fixing what was lost, but by building something entirely new from the shattered pieces. And that stubborn, impossible, beautiful thing was worth every moment of pain it had taken to create it.